An illustrated history of 151 video games is a history book about landmark games. Most of the images in the book are screenshots. The final entry in the book is about a game released in 2012, so there isn't anything more recent than that. Overall, it's a really good video game history book, but it would likely be of limited interest to you if you're expecting development artwork. This review will cover the quality of the physical book itself, the content of the book, the aesthetics, and the nostalgia evoked by the book. I'll also look at whether it provides any insight into the development of the games. Let's start with the quality of the physical book. It's 8.5 by 11 inches. It has about 250 pages of content. It comes with a dust jacket, and I'd say the cover, pages, and the image printing are all of pretty average quality. Alright, now on to the content of the book. I think the writing is very good. It's clearly a book for adults who are interested in video game history. I say it that way because I've read some other books that are sort of defensive or apologists for the video game industry, and they come off as a bit insecure and immature. The tone of this book is one that assumes you're already on board with video games and you aren't judgmental of them. I liked that the writing doesn't feel forced. What I mean is, the author doesn't spend 2 pages on a game if it's only worth talking about for 1 page, or less. I mean, just because a game is worthy to be in this book doesn't mean we need to wax philosophical or pretend that games are more important than they are. There are a few exceptions to that, but overall, I find the book really engaging due to the pace. One of my favorite examples of the effectiveness of his writing is about GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. Here's part of what he has to say. But the game's core and enduring brilliance is in the moment to moment combat, the powerful recoil of the sniper rifle, the thwup satisfaction of the silenced PP7, the roaring ineptitude of 2 dual-wielded clubs. The roaring ineptitude. Anyone who's played GoldenEye knows exactly what he means, right? Back then, it was awesome to dual-wield weapons, but the clubs are so inaccurate, and to dual-wield them just adds to all that. I think the way he uses the phrase roaring ineptitude just perfectly describes the experience. And because he's so perfectly captured that experience that I'm familiar with, I trust that he's also accurately describing the games that I haven't played. Is there any writing or insight from the artists and developers themselves? Well, yeah, pretty much every game has some sort of remark from the lead developer. Seems like Simon Parkin really tried to include something from them on each of the games he covered. Okay, is the book organized in a logical way? Well, all the games are presented in chronological order of their release date. Interspersed between the games are summaries of major console releases, and there's also a few pages that summarize gaming history for the entire decade. So though the book title mentions 151 games, there's actually closer to 180 entries. On each entry, there's a large number showing which of the 151 games is being discussed, the date it was released, and an image of the start screen. Well, it's usually of the start screen. It also includes where you can play the game today, which by now is often out of date or incomplete. For example, many games listed as being on the Xbox Store are also on the PlayStation Store. I also think it's funny that a lot of them just say MAME, which is an emulator. So it's basically saying, well, if you want to play this, you'll have to pirate it. There are some errors in the book, but not very many. For example, here's a cool illustration of the entire first level of Sonic the Hedgehog. The problem is, the keen among you will notice it's actually from Sonic 2. Sinful, Parkin, sinful. With regard to the image variety, they're almost entirely screenshots of the finished product, but there is some promotional art for the older games, and there is also some occasional development art. There's also some other images that have been put together, like all of the Pokemon, the Marble Madness levels, and some levels for Mario. Does this book have what you want it to have? Well, that depends on whether or not you agree with the games that were selected for this book. The main idea is that each game is exceptional or influential in some way or another. And this criteria does lead to the exclusion of certain well-loved games. For example, though Halo 2 was very popular and is fondly remembered by millions of people, it was really the first Halo that had a huge impact on the industry. There are certain series that rightly deserve multiple spots, though, like Metal Gear and Resident Evil. Resident Evil 1 essentially started the modern survival horror genre, and Resident Evil 4, among other things, I would say, pretty much popularized the over the shoulder shooting perspective. As I looked through the book, I noticed I'm more likely to disagree with the inclusion of the more recent games. For example, I don't think Red Dead Redemption or Super Mario Galaxy really did anything that hadn't been done before, and just as good. However, I do think it would have been hard for Simon Parkin to know which games released in the past year would be considered influential down the line. I mean, if you had to pick two games that were released this year that would be considered as influential as Pac Man, I kinda doubt you could do it. So, though I didn't personally agree with the inclusion of every entry, I thought the content was very well selected. Summing up this section, I think the content of this book is exceptionally good. Though it would be nice if there were more images that aren't screenshots, the writing is great, and that's the main reason you'd probably buy this book anyway. On to the aesthetics. Does the book have an artistic, pleasant layout? Well, as I read through the book, I found it was pretty easy to see what was going on with each page. The pages look pretty crowded, but I think everything flows pretty well. I like the little design touches, like how there's a symbol for each game, and the front and back covers have all of them. One thing I didn't like aesthetically is that throughout the book, the title pages have these image conglomerations, and I didn't find them aesthetically pleasing at all. In fact, I find many of them quite unpleasant to look at. It's like image barf. Are there any full pages of art? Well, other than these monstrosities, not really. Images of the systems usually take up a whole page, though, and there are some images that are pretty big, like this map from the original Zelda. Is there anything else about the book's aesthetics that are worth mentioning? The cover of the book is, in my opinion, not very good. It feels more appropriate for a poster than for this well written history book. I mean, I honestly almost didn't buy it because it looked like it would be kind of a simple book rather than the thorough and interesting read that it is. One other kind of weird issue with the book, most of the captions under the images don't necessarily have much to do with the images themselves. I think what probably happened is that they didn't want the pages to be too busy, but they also wanted to have some screenshots and interesting little tidbits about each game. I think what they did was essentially combine the screenshots and the tidbits, even if they had nothing to do with each other. Perhaps they could have just used isolated floating words or found some other way to incorporate the tidbits. I mean, so though this is a little weird and makes no sense if you're casually browsing the book, I actually didn't find it problematic at all as I read through it. Well, all this considered, overall, I would say the aesthetics are below average. If you're reading through the book, the experience will probably be fine, but if you're looking for aesthetically pleasing art, you probably won't be amazed. Next up, the nostalgia evoked by the book. Well, several times while I was reading through the book, I was transported back to when the games were actually released. The book is a time machine of sorts. I think Parkin does a good job of describing the historical context of the games and why they were a big deal at the time. And I think all of that is a part of video game culture. Like when Mortal Kombat was the latest craze, kids really did talk on playgrounds about how to unlock the secret character Reptile. I mean, I personally remember discussions like that happening. So I would suspect the average reader will feel a lot of nostalgia for the games they have some connection with, but for many of the other entries, the experience will probably be mostly academic. Alright, how does the book show us the inner workings of the gaming industry? Well, I think the whole premise of the book is to help people appreciate the strides the industry has made and the contributions of the various creators. Here are some examples of that. Here it talks about how the original Street Fighter arcade cabinets had buttons that would do light, medium, and hard attacks based on how hard you hit the button. And that led to a massive problem where most of the arcade cabinets were breaking constantly. Here is perhaps a lesser known story about Pong. Nolan Bushnell had just hired a rookie engineer, Al Alcorn, and told him that he had brokered a deal with General Electric to produce a coin op version of Pong. He reasoned that the task of replicating such a simple game on the relatively complicated circuits Bushnell had created would make for excellent training for Alcorn, who would be inspired to work hard if he thought it was a legitimate commercial product. There was, however, no deal. Nevertheless, the trick worked, and Alcorn applied himself to the work, improving the design by having the ball bounce at different angles depending on where it hit on the bat, and adding sound effects and a scoring mechanism. Here's another little story of trickery involving the game Breakout, which you might know as Brick Breaker. Steve Jobs, a young, free-spirited engineer who had taken a job at Atari in order to save enough money to go backpacking in India, was handed the project. Jobs was offered a $100 bonus for every integrated circuit he managed to cull from the game on top of his $750 flat fee for building the game, an incentive designed to help keep production costs down for Atari. Jobs promised he would have the design completed in just 4 days, and in order to hit that deadline, he pulled in the help of his friend Steve Wozniak, a technical whiz kid who worked for Hewlett-Packard. Jobs offered Wozniak half of any bonus Atari paid out. Wozniak spent every night working on the project without sleep, creating the game from a description Jobs had given him with neither drawings nor plans. He managed to reduce the number of chips required by the game from between 150 to 200 to just 46. The work netted Jobs a bonus of several $1,000s, about $10,000 actually, but he told Wozniak that he'd received just $700, passing on $350 to his friend for the help. Man. A true business visionary. In addition to some of these stories, I think there's some interesting insights into game design. For example, here it talks about how Eugene Jarvis thought defending things would be more emotionally engaging than attacking them. Investors thought the simple mechanic of rescuing humans in Defender was too complex for people to understand, but the game made something like $35 million per week. Apparently not much has changed. Investors still have no idea about game design. I really liked a lot of the other little tidbits of information, like how Black Onyx in 1983 was the first game to represent health points in a horizontal bar. It's funny the things we take for granted that someone, at some time, needed to invent and design. Well, in closing, I really like this book. Simon Parkin has an enjoyable writing style, and he's created something special. Well, different people want different things in video game art books or history books, but I hope this review has been helpful in showing you what you can expect from this book. If you have any complaints about this video, or if you want to argue about some mistake in this video, please feel free to contact my customer support center.